The restaurant breathed elegance in a way that felt deliberate, almost rehearsed, from the low amber lighting to the quiet confidence of its staff gliding between tables. Every sound seemed softened, glasses touching, silverware settling, murmured conversations wrapped in wealth and privacy. It was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to be seen without being stared at. When the Arab billionaire stepped through the tall glass doors, the atmosphere shifted in a way few noticed consciously, yet everyone felt. He carried himself with a calm authority shaped by years of command, not the loud kind that demanded attention, but the silent gravity that pulled it naturally. His suit was impeccable, dark and understated, tailored to fit him like a second skin, and his expression revealed nothing except focus. The hostess greeted him with a polished smile, asking for his reservation in English. He answered politely in Arabic, his tone respectful, assuming reasonably that a place of this stature would understand. The smile on her face froze just slightly. Confusion flickered across her eyes before she tried again in English, slower this time, louder, as if volume could replace comprehension. He repeated himself, still in Arabic, adding a gentle clarification, but it only deepened the misunderstanding. A faint line appeared between his brows, not from anger, but from the quiet disappointment of a man who had experienced this moment far too often. Around them, nearby diners paused mid-conversation, curiosity sharpening their glances. The hostess nodded uncertainly and gestured for him to wait, disappearing to fetch the manager. The billionaire stood still, hands loosely folded, absorbing the familiar sensation of being important yet unheard. When the manager arrived, breathless and overly apologetic, he spoke rapidly in English, misinterpreting the billionaire's request entirely and offering alternatives that had nothing to do with what was asked. The billionaire listened patiently, then stopped trying. He nodded once, accepting the table he had not chosen, allowing himself to be guided through the dining room like a problem everyone wanted solved quickly rather than correctly as he sat down. The chair sliding smoothly beneath him, his gaze drifted across the room. Faces returned to their meals, whispers fading, interest satisfied now that the disruption had passed. To them, he was just another wealthy foreigner, impressive but distant. Inside, however, a quiet heaviness settled in his chest. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals across continents, spoken to heads of state, influenced markets with a sentence. Yet here, in a room built to serve people like him, his words had become obstacles. He exhaled slowly, adjusting his cufflinks, reminding himself that patience was a skill earned through experience. Still, the loneliness crept in, subtle but persistent. Language, he knew, was more than communication. It was recognition. Without it, a person became a shadow, present but unseen. Across the room, a young waitress paused near the service station, watching him with an intensity she didn't fully understand. She had noticed the moment he walked in, not because of his wealth, but because of the way he stood, composed, restrained, carrying something unspoken. She had seen confusion on the hostess's face, heard the manager's rushed apologies, and something in her chest tightened. Arabic words echoed faintly in her mind, phrases she hadn't spoken aloud in years. They belonged to her childhood, to evenings filled with her father's voice, to stories and prayers spoken softly before sleep. She told herself it wasn't her place. She was just a waitress. This was not her role, not her responsibility. Still, her eyes followed the billionaire as he sat alone at the table, shoulders squared yet subtly heavy. The manager assigned her to his table moments later, unaware of the irony, too busy managing perceptions to notice possibilities. As she picked up her notepad, her palms grew damp. She rehearsed the English greeting automatically, muscle memory taking over, but her heart beat faster with every step toward him. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral, guarded by habit. She delivered the rehearsed lines smoothly, asking if he was ready to order. He listened, then responded in Arabic again, his voice calm but distant now, as though expecting the familiar failure. For a heartbeat, she froze. The room seemed to narrow, the sounds dulling at the edges. Fear whispered that she would embarrass herself, that her words would come out wrong, that she would be exposed. Then another voice, quieter but stronger, reminded her of who she was before life taught her to shrink. She lifted her gaze and answered him in perfect Arabic, her tone respectful, her pronunciation clear and confident. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. His eyes widened slightly, surprise breaking through his composed exterior like sunlight through clouds. He leaned forward just a fraction, as if to confirm he had heard correctly. She continued, translating his request effortlessly, clarifying details the others had missed entirely. With every sentence, the tension around his shoulders eased. A small, genuine smile appeared, transforming his face in a way no one else in the room had seen that evening. For the first time since he entered, he was not just accommodated, he was understood. And though neither of them realized it yet, that single exchange had quietly altered the course of both their lives. The billionaire remained seated long after she finished confirming his order, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, as if he needed something solid to anchor the moment. For years, conversations around him had followed a predictable pattern. People speaking loudly, slowly, simplifying themselves in ways that felt more like caution than respect. But now, for the first time that evening, the rhythm had changed. He looked up at the waitress again, studying her face with curiosity that was not intrusive but thoughtful, the way one examines an unexpected discovery. He spoke to her in Arabic, not about the menu this time, but with a simple question about where she had learned to speak so fluently. She hesitated, surprised by the warmth in his tone, then answered honestly, explaining that Arabic was her first language, spoken at home with her father before life scattered things in directions she never planned. As she spoke, something softened in her expression, a quiet nostalgia coloring her words. The billionaire listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, his attention undivided in a way that made her feel seen rather than evaluated. Around them, the restaurant continued its hushed dance, unaware that something unusually human was unfolding at an otherwise ordinary table. When she finished, he thanked her. Not the routine thanks offered to staff, but a sincere one, weighted with meaning. He said it felt rare to hear his thoughts return to him without distortion. The words landed deeper than she expected, stirring a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. She smiled, modest but genuine, and excused herself to fetch his meal, her steps lighter than before as she moved through the kitchen. The conversation replayed in her mind. She wondered why a simple exchange had felt so significant, why her heart still raced as if she had done something brave instead of ordinary. Plates clinked, orders were called. The air smelled of spices and butter, yet she felt oddly detached from it all. When she returned with his food, arranging the dishes carefully in front of him, he thanked her again and invited her to sit for a moment if her duties allowed. The request startled her. Staff did not sit with guests, especially not guests like him. She glanced toward the manager, who was busy across the room, then back at the billionaire. His expression was calm, respectful, not demanding. She nodded slowly and perched at the edge of the chair opposite him, hands folded in her lap. He began speaking, still in Arabic, telling her that he often traveled alone and that in many places, people recognized his status before recognizing his humanity. He admitted that moments like the one she had just created were rare and unexpectedly powerful. She listened, unsure of what to say at first, then shared small pieces of her own life. How she had once dreamed of becoming a translator. How responsibilities had forced her into work that paid the bills but left her passions untouched. He listened with the same attentiveness she had shown him earlier, never glancing away, never rushing her words. The conversation deepened naturally, flowing without effort. He spoke about his early years, about being underestimated because of his accent and origins, about rooms where people smiled politely while quietly dismissing him. He described how success had amplified those misunderstandings rather than erased them, how wealth often built walls instead of bridges. She absorbed every word, realizing that beneath the polished exterior sat a man who had fought battles no one applauded. In return, she spoke of invisibility, the way service workers learned to exist without being noticed, how easily their voices blended into background noise. Their experiences were different, yet the emotion beneath them was strikingly similar. Recognition, they seemed to agree without saying it aloud, was a universal hunger. When a pause settled between them, it was comfortable rather than awkward. He smiled again, this time with something like relief, and told her she had reminded him why he valued language so deeply, not as a tool of power, but as a bridge of dignity. Nearby tables had begun to notice. Curious glances drifted toward them, confusion evident on some faces, judgment on others. A billionaire speaking intimately with a waitress did not fit neatly into anyone's expectations. The manager finally caught sight of them and stiffened, concern flashing across his features. He started to approach, but the billionaire raised a subtle hand, stopping him without a word. The manager hesitated, then retreated, unsure but unwilling to challenge a man of such influence. The waitress noticed the shift in attention and felt a flicker of self-consciousness, but the billionaire's calm presence steadied her. He asked one final question, his tone thoughtful rather than intrusive, what she truly wanted for her future, if fear were not a factor. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She took a breath and answered honestly, speaking of education, of using her language skills, of wanting to build something meaningful rather than merely survive. He listened, eyes intent, committing her words to memory. When she finished, he nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. He thanked her again and suggested she return to her work, promising they would speak again before he left. As she stood and walked away, her legs trembled slightly, not from anxiety but from the weight of possibility. Behind her, the billionaire watched her go, his expression no longer distant, but quietly resolute, aware that this evening had shifted from an inconvenience into an encounter he would not forget. As the evening stretched on, the restaurant gradually filled with the gentle fatigue that followed a long, indulgent dinner service. Yet the billionaire remained unhurried, savoring not just the food but the unfamiliar sense of ease that had settled over him. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, as though each bite carried a memory, his mind returning again and again to the unexpected conversation. Across the room, the waitress continued her work, moving between tables with practiced efficiency, though her thoughts were no longer entirely present. Every so often, their eyes met briefly, exchanging a silent acknowledgement that felt more intimate than words. When dessert was cleared and the check discreetly placed on the table, the billionaire rested his hand over it without opening the folder, signaling he wasn't finished yet. He waited until the room thinned and the noise softened, then motioned for the waitress to come over once more. This time, when she approached, there was less uncertainty in her steps, though her heart still beat faster than usual. He thanked her again in Arabic, his voice warm and steady, and told her that moments of genuine connection were rare in his world, often buried beneath layers of transactions and expectations. He explained that trust, like language, revealed itself not through grand gestures but through small, sincere acts, and that her willingness to speak had shown both courage and authenticity. That he reached into his jacket and removed a simple card, far more modest than one might expect from a man of his stature. On it was his name, a personal number, and a handwritten note in Arabic that read like an invitation rather than an instruction. He slid it across the table toward her, careful not to make the gesture feel heavy. He explained that he was involved in several international ventures requiring people who could bridge cultures without losing themselves, and that if she wished, he would like to speak with her again, properly, without the constraints of a dining room. The waitress stared at the card, her fingers hovering before she finally picked it up, as if afraid it might vanish. Doubt flickered across her face, followed by disbelief, then cautious hope. She asked quietly if he was serious, and he smiled, answering that he never offered opportunities lightly, nor did he expect gratitude, only honesty and effort. He stood then, adjusting his coat, and paid the bill with a generosity that left the manager stunned, though the amount itself felt secondary to what lingered in the air. As he prepared to leave, he spoke one final sentence in Arabic, telling her never to underestimate the power of her voice, because it had already traveled further than she realized. After he left, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but for the waitress, nothing felt quite the same. The manager approached her, a mix of curiosity and forced neutrality in his tone, asking what the billionaire had wanted. She answered simply that he had needed help being understood. The manager nodded, unconvinced yet unable to argue. When her shift finally ended, she stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights blurring as emotion caught up with her. She held the card tightly, replaying every word, every glance, every pause. At home, she placed the card on her small table and sat staring at it for a long time, wrestling with fear and excitement in equal measure. Sleep came late, filled with dreams of airports, offices, and conversations spoken without apology. In the days that followed, she debated calling, doubting her worth, then remembering the sincerity in his eyes. When she finally dialed the number, her voice trembled only for a moment before steadying. His assistant answered, already expecting her call. That alone felt like confirmation that the night had been real. Weeks later, her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. Meetings replaced late-night shifts, notebooks replaced trays, and her language, once a private relic of the past, became her greatest strength. The billionaire kept his distance professionally, offering guidance rather than control, insisting she earn every step forward while never questioning her place. She learned quickly, absorbing not just knowledge but confidence, discovering that her voice carried weight far beyond the restaurant where it had been rediscovered. There were moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of fear that she might fail spectacularly, but each time, she remembered the first moment she had spoken and been heard. Meanwhile, the billionaire found himself changed as well. He listened more, interrupted less, sought understanding before agreement. In boardrooms and negotiations, he carried the lesson she had unknowingly taught him, that true power lay not in being the loudest voice, but in recognizing the quiet ones. Months later, they crossed paths again, not as patron and waitress, but as equals in conversation, sharing tea and quiet laughter after a long day of work. The restaurant where they had first met stood unchanged, its lights still glowing with the same refined elegance, unaware of the transformation it had witnessed. As they parted that evening, the billionaire reflected on how a single sentence, spoken with courage, had shifted the trajectory of two lives. And the woman who had once blended into the background understood now that her voice had never been small. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to be spoken.